you just saw was the broadcast intro to the 2002 Long Beach Grand Prix, won by Michael Andretti, but historically notable because it's the last Indy-style race that was broadcast on the Fox TV network until next year, when all of the IndyCar races will be broadcast on network Fox Sports. This is a dramatically important day in the history of IndyCar racing. One of the best TV deals that has ever been signed, we could probably say, in motorsports history. And there's a lot of things that have led to this, a lot of different factors. No one person or one entity can get credit for it, but we can give a lot of credit to everyone involved, right? Penske Entertainment, Fox Sports, got it done, man. They got it done. And I guess credit to NBC for being willing to bid against Fox, because if that had not happened, I doubt that we would have seen this good of a deal put together for IndyCar. But let's just say this, and let me say it unequivocally, okay? This is positive for IndyCar. Period, full stop. If you like IndyCar racing, if you love this thing, this is positive for it. Now, are there negative aspects to this? Yes. In the grand scheme of things, looking long-term, looking even short-term, this is an objectively better deal for IndyCar racing, better for the sport, better for the teams, the sponsors, the drivers, everybody involved. Everybody, okay? Again, we can talk, and this video isn't really the time for it. I briefly mentioned it yesterday, but to complain about Wendy's or Waltrip's right now would not be appropriate, right? We need to talk about this deal and what is important about it. And what is important about it is that this provides a ton of resources to IndyCar to actually grow and move forward. This is an incredible opportunity to grow and move forward. Okay? Let's talk about some of the details and why this has provided such an opportunity for IndyCar racing. Number one, all races, as I mentioned, will be broadcast on Fox, including the 2 Indy 500 qualifying days, all on network television. The first time in history that has happened, live on network television. First time in history that has happened. Bob Pockrass, who I suppose we will be talking a lot more about in the context of IndyCar for the foreseeable future. So welcome back, Bob. He reported on Twitter that each race that is on Network Fox, with the exception of the Indianapolis 500, will have a 2.5-hour broadcast window. Now, the Indy 500, and I presume the qualifying days, have a 5-hour window on Network Fox. The Super Bowl, the Daytona 500, and the Indianapolis 500 will all appear on the same network live for the first time in history. All on Fox. 3 of the biggest sports properties in this country on the same broadcasting platform. That means that cross-promotion is very much a thing that is on the table and a possibility at the Super Bowl and the Daytona 500. That's huge. I don't know what else to say about that. All practice and qualifying will air on either FS1 or FS2. While we don't have specifics on that, I would certainly hope that qualifications for the non-Indy 500 races would get priority coverage on FS1. And I would hope among hope that at least a couple of hours of each day of Indy 500 practice is broadcast on FS1. If you remember, Fox Sports 1 is essentially the old Speed channel, okay? So race fans know how to find FS1. They haven't switched away from it, especially if they're a drag racing or a NASCAR fan, since it went away from being Speed channel, right? Sports car fans know how to find it. IndyCar fans, even if you go back way back in the day, they know where to find Wind Tunnel and the Speed Report, and even Champ Car races, dating back to as late as 2006 on the Speed channel. Essentially, that's the equivalent of Indy 500 practice and qualifying being broadcast on Speed Channel, which, fantastic. Now, I would imagine a lot of it ends up on FS2, but again, until we see a true full broadcast schedule, we won't know that for sure. But that's good. Positive. Very, very positive. The same goes for the Indy Next by Firestone races. The majority of those will be on FS1. I can't even, you want to talk about something that was good for IndyCar. This is the best day Indy Next has ever had. Ever. There might actually be real sponsorships that start appearing in Indy Next because of this. Now, this isn't just a family money thing at this point. This could really lead to actual companies wanting and being willing to step up and sponsor Indy Next cars because they're actually on television. They're not on Peacock, right? This is huge for Indy Next. Huge for that series. Enormous. The IndyCar schedule was released today in conjunction with this. This is the earliest that I can remember an IndyCar schedule being publicly available. Perhaps the earliest an IndyCar schedule has been available since the first year of the IRL in 1996, when they had that schedule essentially announced by the time of the 1995 Indianapolis 500. I don't know if we could go quite back that far, but that's the only example I can come up with in my head for as early an open wheel schedule has come out. That's positive, although later on in this video, we will talk about the schedule, and there are some things to be concerned about. There's no doubt about it with the schedule. But again, we're staying positive, at least for now, about the TV deal because it's a hell of a deal. Now, no on-air talent has been announced. That will all be at a later date. It was Nathan Brown of the Indy Star that mentioned that today is the day that the talent search for IndyCar on Fox begins in earnest, according to the executives at Fox. So, like I said before, man, we can talk about it minutia, right? We are obviously, I have the same concerns that I had yesterday, right? You hope that it's not too NASCAR heavy. You hope that it has an IndyCar expert focus. You hope that it doesn't have the same feeling of a NASCAR broadcast. NASCAR is its own thing, and IndyCar is its own thing, and I hope Fox recognizes and understands that the properties need to be separate. Now, that being said, I think it would be, I will say this, right? I would love to see Mike Joy host the Indianapolis 500 broadcast. Not necessarily be the play-by-play guy, but I think if Mike Joy is not involved in some way in the broadcast, that's a missed opportunity. I think he certainly would appreciate that recognition and consideration, and I think Mike would do a great job. So there's my public support of Mike Joy being a part of the broadcast in some way. But I think from a meta perspective, a overall perspective, this is extremely positive. Now, I guess we'll talk really quick about streaming. That the concerns, I understand where the concerns are with streaming. There's a new package that will be coming out next year, which includes HBO Max, ESPN, and Fox, among other streamers. It will be a total of $40 to $50 a month. But I will say this, okay? Yeah, if you're a cable cutter or a cord cutter, this is more expensive than Peacock. But I would say if you're a racing fan, HBO Max gets you the World Endurance Championship in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. ESPN gets you Formula One, and Fox gets you NASCAR and IndyCar, or at least NASCAR for the first half of the season and IndyCar. It is cheaper than cable, but it's not super ideal. Now, every race, if you can afford an antenna to get the local broadcast channels in your area, and that's a one-time cost of $30, you can get IndyCar on Fox every single race for free, essentially. So again, that's not a problem. Streaming, to go back to that point, this is a thing, right? Because there's a lot of Peacock defenders out there, and I understand why you're a defender, because you enjoy that service. It's good as a service. It's an inexpensive service. If you know what Peacock is, where to find it, and how many buttons you need to click to get to IndyCar, right? Okay, that's good for you. It's not good for the meta sport. I sometimes say this to fans of sprint car racing, because fans of sprint car racing will say, you know, I'm surprised it doesn't grow more, or I'm surprised more people don't know about this. I wish more people know about this. And I say to them, you typically don't have, I mean, I think I saw a CBS Sports Spectacular on the World of Outlaws, right? It was like a highlights package of a race. That's great. That's all well and good. But the majority of the time, you have to make a tremendous monetary investment just to explore whether or not you want to be a fan of that particular form of racing. And IndyCar had the same problem with Peacock. If you wanted to watch a practice or a qualifying session or a race replay, you had to pony up the cash to Peacock. And then you had to know what Peacock is, where to find Peacock, and then where to find IndyCar on the Peacock app. There were a lot of steps to find IndyCar racing. Now with Fox Sports, again, if you are already a Peacock person, I'm not talking about you necessarily. I'm talking about the other millions of people out there that tuned into the Indy 500 that didn't tune into a single thing of Peacock and never have and never will in their entire life. They might know where FS1 is. They might happen across a practice or qualifying session on FS1. So the exponential growth in the amount of people, the sheer number of people that can tune into IndyCar content, you can't even put into words how much bigger this is, okay? Streaming only is an advantage if the streamer is available. Like if it's Netflix, there's a chance, right? There's a chance you can make that work. But unless you're at the level of Netflix, if you're on a streamer, it's almost a hindrance to growth 99% of the time. So the fact that all of the sessions are on television is great for growth because you want to talk about teams. It's great for the teams. Finally, the teams have something they objectively cannot complain about because now you have something to sell to sponsors that you didn't have last year and you don't have if you're involved in any other racing series. We have 19 network broadcasts, says the team to the sponsor. And the existing sponsors, maybe some that were 1 foot out the door, might want to reconsider coming on back. Come on home. Because you're not going to get a better TV deal in racing if you're a sponsor. So if you're staying, you're happy. If you're leaving, maybe you should think about staying. And I think that would also go for manufacturers. This doesn't hurt. If you're a manufacturer, this only helps that situation. Whether you're staying, thinking about leaving, or maybe thinking about coming in. Positive across the board for the meta of the sport. This deal. Straight up, no bullshit, positive. There are a few things to be concerned about, particularly some of the things that were announced today in regards to the schedule. So let's take a look at the schedule and we'll talk about it. Okay, so in one of the bizarre moments of 2024, IndyCar resurrected Speed Channel, at least on Twitter, at least for now. I thought this was just the funniest thing, and yes, Chase Holden is bringing back Speed as well. But yeah, here's the schedule. Again, credible that this is out when it is, but there are a lot of things to talk about. And some of them are not necessarily positive, and some of them are interesting ideas that perhaps will lead to other things. I guess we'll say it that way. Start on the streets of St. Petersburg on March 2nd, which should be fairly close to the Daytona 500. That's kind of close to the 2020, was that 2023 or 2022 date that was really, really close to the Daytona 500. That's potentially a great lead-in from a Fox broadcasting perspective. I don't hate that. I really don't hate that. I think that's great. Thermal Club. It's extremely important. This was long rumored, that Thermal Club has now become a points race for IndyCar, a points race at the Thermal Club. And it takes place, what is that, 3 weeks after St. Pete? That's not good. I'll just say it. That is not good. Not that the Thermal Club got a points race, but the fact that there is 3 weeks in between St. Pete and the Thermal Club. Come on, man. Come on. Another 3 weeks to Long Beach, and then another 3 weeks to Barber. Yeah, the beginning of the season is very rough. There's no doubt about it. Very, very rough from a scheduling standpoint, right? Again, all of these races are on Fox. That's great. The issue is that I would think going forward, especially now that you potentially have lead-ins from the Super Bowl and the Daytona 500, the front half of the schedule prior to the Indianapolis 500 needs more races. And I would say the middle of the season, and I get it, a lot of these places are Midwestern and you can't run them in the wintertime. I get it. I understand that. Find places that you can run. Phoenix, Homestead, places like that. Texas. Run them early in the season. Fill out that schedule. Once the Daytona 500 happens, and if you continue to get every race on Fox, my God, fill out the front of the season. Have it all lead into the Indy 500. Speaking to leading into the Indy 500. So, on principle, I'm very torn on this Barber date. I personally do not believe that you should be racing in Alabama in the month of May for IndyCar. Barber is one of those races that I would like to see moved up a couple of weeks. That being said, this is the right idea. It's the wrong race, the wrong track. Barber being on May 4th means that Indy cars will be on track, although not at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, every week of May. That's a good idea. That's how things should be, I think. That means you compete against the Miami Grand Prix directly. I've been advocating for that for years. I don't think you should let Miami have a weekend in May where they go uncontested. Formula One should not be impeding on the month of May in the U.S. If you're IndyCar, if you're looking at that from a strategic standpoint as IndyCar, yeah, you should compete against them. And you now have an opportunity to do that. Is Barber the right thing? No. What I would do is I would move the Indy GP up there and do 2 weekends of time trials for the Indy 500, but that's a discussion and a video for another day. I will explain how that would work. I've had a Professor Know-It-All video in the can for a little while, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, no, I think May, right idea, not quite the right execution yet, but I think it's on the right path. I think the issue with the beginning of the schedule is definitely the gaps, right? Definitely the gaps. And I do think, let's be honest, Thermal Club being a points race that's not going to be particularly popular with the fans. I'm very curious to see what happens with the Thermal Club from the perspective of working to win back a lot of the fans who were turned off by that event last year. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I don't think it's impossible. Don't think it's impossible, but there is a lot of work to be done with the Thermal Club between now and then. Indy Road Course on the 10th, not a surprise. Indy 500, trust me, you guys know we'll have a lot of coverage of the Indy 500 as time goes on. Streets of Detroit continuing to be the race after the Indy 500. That shouldn't be a shock. That was on the IMSA schedule. The real bird down and unfortunate reality is that Gateway, while I think it's good that it moves to June, I think there's a potentially cool crossover with the Indy 500 that can happen there. The fact that almost certainly is clashing with the 24 hours of Le Mans is very disappointing as a racing fan and someone who, had plans, and I guess I should announce now, probably, unfortunately, not going to be able to make Gateway. I was very much planning on being at the 24 hours of Le Mans by hook or by crook next year. So sorry, Gateway, on that one. I'll have to watch it in a hotel room in France. But yeah, that's disappointing for drivers and teams that wanted to cross over for sure. Yeah, I wish there had been a consideration there, but that might have been the only way that Gateway stayed on the schedule and was able to get on Fox. So again, can't criticize too hard. It's just very unfortunate that that's how it worked out. Elkhart Lake, Road America on the 22nd of June. A good little kind of nice rhythm of races here. essentially don't have a real big break. I guess there's a week in between Road America and Mid-Ohio, but then Mid-Ohio, July 6th on Fox. Then the doubleheader in Iowa on the 12th and the 13th. Then the next week heading to Toronto on Fox. Great for Toronto after being kind of mired on Peacock for as long as it was. There are some questions surrounding the future of that race that we'll have more clear indications of later on. But at least for next year, Streets of Toronto on Fox. And then on to WeatherTech Raceway in Laguna Seca at the end of July. Then to Portland. So I'm pleased to see that the schedule worked out, that it's West Coast back-to-back. Although there's a week in between those, so I guess the trailers will be able to go back to Indy and then head back out west. Then the Milwaukee Mile goes to one race, the Thermal Club points race, essentially replacing one of the Milwaukee doubleheader races. I don't hate that. I don't think doubleheaders are necessarily the best for the teams or the fans or the sponsors, believe it or not. Like, yeah, it's cool to have two races, but in my opinion, it's better to have one race and promote one race than to promote two races. That's just my opinion. And then the season ends once again at Nashville Superspeedway on Labor Day weekend. The whole schedule moves up a week due to the fact that Fox has obviously the NFL contract, and it's important to get the season within the 6 months that the NFL isn't actively on television. The thing that I would say is, in terms of Nashville Superspeedway, in terms of the rest of the season, is that you have now an even more compressed schedule essentially than you did last year, or this year, I guess we should say. So what happens to IndyCar in the other half of the year? The other 6 months in which there is nothing IndyCar on track? That's a concern. That is a concern. That, I suppose, will be answered later on in time. But, yeah, the schedule's a mixed bag for sure. But the overwhelmingly positive thing is that every race on that schedule is on Fox. So, obviously, we have minutia and details to talk about as time goes on. But I would say, overall, very positive day for the sport. But very interested to hear your comments down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. And obviously, we'll be talking much more about this in the future. So subscribe if you got to this point. We'll see you in the next video.